even before 9/11.
Decision 2006. From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening, 9:30 p.m. here in the East, 6:30 p.m. on the West Coast, and tonight American voters decide the direction of their nation. We have had some major poll closings and some major posted projected victories for the Democrats, especially in the U.S. Senate. We begin in the state of Pennsylvania. The son of the former governor there, Casey, will be the next U.S. senator from there, sending away the incumbent Senator Santorum. In Ohio, Congressman Sherrod Brown has defeated the incumbent Mike DeWine. A big race here now in the state of Maryland, where in the past 30 minutes, Congressman Ben Cardin has turned away the interest by Steele, his competitor. This race we've been watching for a long time, big money, high interest race. Ditto in the state of New Jersey, where Bob Menendez, Democrat from the House of Representatives, has turned away Tom Kean, the son of the governor of the same name. An independent in the U.S. Senate from Connecticut. You last knew him as Democrat Joe Lieberman, turned away by his own primary, came back as a third-party candidate. Iraq, a big issue in that race. The governor of Michigan, Stabenow, elected overwhelmingly tonight. Virginia, the Senate race there is too close, too early to call that race. Allen versus Webb, you see the numbers in at this hour. Lincoln Chafee, son of John Chafee in Rhode Island, the moderate Republican, trying to hang on to his job tonight. This race in New England, also too early to call. Out west, a race we'll be watching tonight, John Kyle, Republican, trying to hang on. Again, too early to call. Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton spent a fortune, cruised to victory here in the state of New York. Bob Byrd, age 89, begins term number 9, representing the state of West Virginia. Richard Lugar cruises in Indiana, where, incidentally, 2 Republican members of Congress have gone down to the Democrats tonight from Indiana. In Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy, another term for the liberal senator from the Commonwealth. In Vermont, the vacant seat will be filled by the independent Sanders, who sits with the Democrats when they caucus. In Ohio, the Democrats pick up a governor. Strickland is the victor in Ohio. And in Massachusetts, the second ever black governor in United States history, Deval Patrick. Also in the state of Maryland, just in the time we have been on the air, former mayor of Baltimore, Martin O'Malley, the governor in the state of Maryland. And I've been told we now have a call in Rhode Island. Sheldon Whitehouse is going to defeat the incumbent Lincoln Chafee, who inherited the family Senate seat, you might say. Lincoln Chafee seemed a bit mystified that as a moderate, someone who had reached across the aisle before, he could have gone down tonight, and tonight we learn he is projected to have been defeated in Rhode Island. So a lot of Democrats to report moving on to victory. We mentioned at the top of the broadcast, before we analyze these results, we will check in with all of our correspondents and analysts, and we're going to begin tonight in Washington at the White House with our chief White House correspondent, David Gregory. And David, what was the last you heard from the building behind you?
Well, the president is monitoring results with top aides being fed by Karl Rove, his political advisor, the president in the study of the residents. So far, the news has not been good. The mood, I'm told, is sober. Top Republicans all day long have been saying they now consider it unlikely that Republicans can retain control of the House. And now you look at these Senate races, reports of it being deadlocked in Virginia. And some of the momentum that Republicans thought they had, like in Maryland, now being dashed. They thought they were coming back. Lincoln Chafee in Rhode Island. That has not happened either. Now the White House watching with particular concern for how Republicans in New England are going to fare. Again, Iraq, the big issue there. Brian?
And David, when will we know more from inside the White House, their reaction to what is becoming tonight's trend across the country?
We're not going to hear from the president tonight. We expect to hear from him tomorrow, Brian.
All right, David Gregory in Washington for us tonight. We mentioned at the top of the broadcast, perhaps you've been following all day, some of the problems at the polls that have been reported throughout the day. 18 states in all with reported problems. NBC News correspondent Chip Reed tracking that part of this story for us tonight from Washington on Capitol Hill. Chip, good evening.
Well, good evening, Brian. Most of the problems that we've seen today have involved confusion over electronic voting. That has led to some very long lines, and that has led some state officials and in some cases judges to order polling places in some precincts in nearly a dozen states to stay open late. In Denver today, lines in some precincts were out the door and down the block. Bill Ritter, Democratic candidate for governor, waited nearly 2 hours to vote.
It's a long time to wait, and so we have to, figure out what happened.
What happened is voters and poll workers had difficulty with new electronic voting machines. About 16 million Americans are using them for the first time this year, causing long lines, frustration, and lost votes from Houston, Texas.
We'd have fixed it yesterday, we wouldn't have had no problem.
To Deerfield Beach, Florida.
You can't vote. And I said, why not? And he said, because the machines are down.
Still, election experts say electronic voting has caused far fewer problems than some had feared.
Overall, they're relatively minor. Most of the things got fixed by the morning time so that voters ultimately were able to vote. And things went smoothly from then on.
But voting machines are not the only problem. Some states have tightened voter ID requirements. Many voters, including the governor of South Carolina, were caught by surprise.
I don't have that blue card with me.
In Virginia, the issue is intimidation after some voters received calls telling them not to vote.
You will not be allowed to test your vote on Tuesday. If you do show up, you will be charged criminally.
The FBI is now investigating. In several states, Democrats are complaining about so-called robocalls placed by computer over and over and over to the same phone numbers.
Tammy Duckworth is wrong on taxes and wrong for Illinois. This call was paid for by the National Republican Congressional Committee.
Both sides are aggressively watching the election for irregularities aimed at their candidates. Interest group phone banks have received thousands of complaints, and the Justice Department has nearly 1,000 people on the ground investigating allegations of voting violations. And bottom line, a lot of problems, but nothing really catastrophic so far. But keep in mind, we've learned in the past, in Florida 2000, for example, that the big problems surface once a race in an important state becomes too close to call, and then the lawyers get involved. Brian?
All right, Chip Reed, thanks. As you watch it there, we'll continue to check on in with you during the night. And that brings us to our Decision 2006 headquarters, actually 8 stories above 30 Rockefeller Plaza. But thanks to the videotape, it looks like we're in the midst of the plaza, where we have the best professionals in the business to help us along tonight. Tom Brokaw, Tim Russert, and to cover the exit polling, the data already in, interesting numbers all. Campbell Brown is with us tonight for that. Campbell?
Well, Brian, we have to be cautious with the exit polling, with people still voting, especially out west. It is still early, but what they can give us is a sense for the mood of the country. And what is standing out so far is that people are feeling pretty gloomy. Just 4 in 10 of those polled believe things are headed in the right direction today. More than half of voters said the country is seriously off on the wrong track. And one of the big questions leading up to today's vote involves that old saying, all politics is local. Well, that did not hold true this year. 2/3 of voters said they were voting on national issues, not local. And one of the big national issues is, of course, the war in Iraq. Just 41% of voters approve of the war. A sizable majority, 57%, said they disapprove. Weighing on President Bush's job approval rating, which stands at 42%, with 58% disapproving. Congress, though, is in even worse shape. Just over 1 in 3 of voters approve of the job Congress is doing, One thing, though, that people do seem to be feeling better about, the economy. 49% of voters today said the economy is excellent or good. Just 13% rate it poor. And that is noticeable because 4 years ago, people were extremely negative about the economy. It is a big difference and really the one positive in President Bush's favor. Overall, though, Brian, a lot of pessimism tonight.
All right, Campbell, we'll keep watching the numbers, and all of this brings us over to Tim Russert. I looked over a second ago. You were getting it out of its container. You said to me about the whiteboard, it's time. Go ahead, Doctor.
This is what it's all about, Brian. Going into tonight's election, the Democrats had to hold 2 seats, New Jersey and Maryland. They have done it. Then they had to win 6 of 7 seats in order to gain control of the Senate. They've won Pennsylvania. They've won Ohio. They've won Rhode Island. They have 4 seats left: Virginia, Missouri, Montana, Tennessee. They must win 3 of those 4 to take control of the Senate. They're still in the game.
Already they have strung together a fairly impressive string of these, though, tonight.
We said that they had to win 8 of 9, and they have 5 in a row. They have to win 3 out of the 4. Tennessee and Missouri look like the most difficult. Virginia, they're running a little bit behind. This is going to be a long night, but the Democrats are in the hunt for taking control of the Senate.
And the House of Representatives is another story entirely, but the night is young. Tim Russert, thanks. And Tom, let's talk about the mood of this apparently cranky electorate out there. The polls were telling us this before we went in tonight, and it looks like the anger is motivating so many of these votes.
Yeah, and the anger has manifestations across a wide range of issues. It begins with Iraq, but also corruption is part of that. I think the big issue, however, is that there's no credibility and accountability in Washington these days for people across the country. They look at the federal government as simply dysfunctional. It doesn't work nearly as well as their state or local governments. And so they're sending a message here. You're finding a lot of independents probably that will move toward the Democrats. They've been in the Bush camp in the past. And as I go across the country, I've heard from a lot of Republicans, longtime traditional Republicans, who are very angry with the administration's inability to change course on some of the key issues, Iraq particularly. They're not saying abandon it, but acknowledge that some things are not going well there. Now, whether there's a philosophical shift or not, you can't say that yet because we don't know whether the Democrats are just the beneficiary of all that.
Tom Brokaw, thanks. We'll be checking in with all evening long, which brings us to a program note. We ask that you stay with us for our comprehensive coverage of this election night 2006. We'll be here tonight to bring you all the results. That is 10 o'clock on the West Coast, along with hourly updates right here on this NBC station, and instant results, of course, all night long on MSNBC.com. When NBC Nightly News continues after a break this election night 2006, the political gesture, how one president's signature move is getting approval from a lot of other politicians. But first, the fight against those rising floodwaters out in the Pacific Northwest after the record rains there. The weather pattern called the Pineapple Express has barreled across the Pacific Northwest and dumped record rainfall and pushed river levels there to all-time highs. This particular storm swept in from Hawaii and forced evacuations across Washington state and Oregon as floods and mudslides blocked highways and stranded residents there. Hundreds of Washington State National Guard troops have now been mobilized in this as even more rain is now expected. NBC's Jennifer London has the latest.
It's the worst storm in a decade.
The whole house shook, the windows were shaking.
Homeowners throughout the Pacific Northwest could only stand back and watch.
I mean, it's so much water.
Some parts of western Washington got up to 10 inches of rain in 24 hours. That's more rain in one day than normally falls during all of November. A state of emergency has been declared in 18 counties.
It's probably going to get worse before it gets better.
Overflowing rivers turned farms into lakes, and the main road outside of Hamilton, Washington, became a fast-moving river. At least one motorist died when his truck was swept away. Evacuation shelters have been set up in the hardest-hit areas. This is what it looks like up and down western Washington today as record rainfalls have pushed at least 8 major rivers over their banks, swallowing towns like here in Sultan, northeast of Seattle.
It's not the first time there's been water down Main Street, that's for sure. It probably won't be the last.
Sandbags couldn't hold back the water at Mountain Man Barbecue.
Well, it made it all the way back to, well, look at the garbage cans on the ground. They were floating.
To the south in Oregon, the storm is expected to drop another 3 to 9 inches of rain. On this soggy hillside, 3 homes are close to slipping into the ocean, and there's nothing homeowners Lynn and Jim Nelson can do.
Our investment's gone.
And on this election day, as voters struggled to get to their polling stations, the bigger story here was the weather. Jennifer London, NBC News, Sultan, Washington.
Up next after another break, a shaky videotape of the World Trade Center and other landmarks, dramatic new evidence of what might have been. For the first time, Iraq's Interior Ministry has brought charges of torture against members of the Iraqi police force. More than 50 officers and civilians are accused of connections to the Shiite death squads and of torturing hundreds of inmates at the notorious prison known there as Site 4. Tonight, we have a rare glimpse inside a terrorist plot, made public with the sentencing in London of a man who admits planning to bomb various institutions and landmarks, both here and in the United Kingdom. Now, with the home video just released and the documents now uncovered, we are getting the very first look at just how thorough these preparations were. The story tonight from NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams.
5 months before the 9/11 attacks, Al-Qaeda terror planners shot this video of potential targets, prominent financial buildings in New York City. At one point, the camera tilts over and zooms in on the World Trade Center as the photographer imitates the sound of an explosion. When police found the video in London 2 years ago, alarmed U.S. authorities raised the terror threat level around financial buildings in New York, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. Today, the man who led the U.S. surveillance operation for Al-Qaeda, Diran Barat, was sentenced to prison.
Quite clearly, what he wanted to do was to collapse those buildings with everybody inside them. The destruction is almost unimaginable. The scale of the carnage would be immense.
Barat gathered bomb manuals and wrote detailed memos on the vulnerabilities of what he scouted. Only one guard visibly carries a weapon, he wrote of one building. At another, he said, restroom stall doors don't go all the way to the floor. If anything is being assembled there, rest it on the toilet seat. Barat recommended driving cars loaded with explosives into building basements. But after the World Trade Center attack, he shifted his attention to London and suggested attacks on subway trains and luxury hotels. Barat's lawyers say he never actually took any steps to carry out an attack, but the judge said his plans would have killed thousands and sentenced him to serve at least 40 years in prison. Pete Williams, NBC News at Homeland Security in Washington.
On Wall Street, the market moved into record territory before slipping a bit. The Dow gained more than 51 points on the day. NASDAQ was up nearly 10 points at the end of trading. Up next here after a break, what Bill Clinton started that others are now doing.
Tonight on the Channel 4 News at 11, the polls close in a little over an hour from now. Then the real counting begins. We're live with the latest returns from the top of the ticket on down. Also, will the president's party still control Congress? That should be decided tonight. Plus, there is other news, the Britney surprise. We'll have those stories and much more at 11.
Because this is a big night in American politics, we thought we would end the broadcast tonight on a spreading trend we have noticed among politicians. If politics is the art of the gesture, one gesture has now become widespread. Tonight, NBC's Josh Menkowitz takes us behind the podium.
America's politicians are all thumbs. Inside politics, this is called the Clinton thumb.
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be cured by what is right with America.
A closed hand, but not quite a clenched fist. The thumb lies flat on top of the fingers. The motion is like knocking on a door. No Clinton imitation is complete without it.
I will do them both together.
But now everyone's doing it. Republicans.
I don't know one person.
Other Democrats.
which will reinforce what people are learning at home, right between wrong and if
even other Clintons, although hers needs a little work.
There is nothing wrong with America that cannot be fixed by what is right about America.
And in a true hands-across-the-sea gesture, we even found the Clinton thumb in Parliament.
Deliberately to kill innocent civilians.
So why does this work? Well, first of all, it has none of the anger of a clenched fist, and it's not accusing someone of something because pointing's rude. It's optimistic and confident. And, my fellow Americans, there is no arguing with history.
Politicians now like to emulate success. After Nixon did this and then he was impeached, nobody did that anymore. But this worked for Clinton. That's why you see every politician doing it.
Republican political consultant Roger Stone says that in the politics of today, nothing is left to chance, including a candidate's gestures.
The gesture says something about them that the words sometimes can't say.
Presidential mannerisms are legend. Ronald Reagan did that head bob that meant a good one-liner was on the way. Mr. Bush likes to point at friends in the crowd. And while the Clinton thumb may have its roots in JFK's Camelot, its branches now cover the political landscape. I'm Josh Mankiewicz, NBC News, and I approve this message.
That is our broadcast for this Tuesday night, election night. Thank you for being with us. I'm Brian Williams. We hope this is just the start of the time we'll be spending together here tonight. We will be on the air with hourly updates and then a full hour of coverage tonight. That's at 10, 9 Central on this NBC station. So we'll look for you right back here a bit later on. Good night.